Listeners, what do we carry with us from the people we love and lose, and what does it mean to make a choice from the center of our grief? These are questions I sit with often, and this week I'm examining them with memoirist, editor, and writing instructor Jill Christman. Her latest memoir, The Heart Folds Early, was recently published by the University of Nebraska Press. Jill has been bravely and honestly writing about her life for decades, and she does it with tremendous skill and artistry. This book is her most urgent one yet. It's about choice, grief, love, and what it means to make the hardest decision of your life from inside a life that is already full and complicated and real. This conversation is full of heart and craft tips. In it, we explore grief as well as how to handle time in memoir, the power of signposting, and why memoir is an act of extraction and not accumulation. As Jill puts it, I have never met a secret that helped anybody, and this episode is going to help you find the courage and the craft to say the true things that you need to say. Let's go ahead and dive in. Welcome to Writing Resilience, the podcast for writers who want to write and live the story that sets them free. I'm your host, Lisa Cooper Ellison, a writer, transformational and trauma-informed coach, story alchemist, and fellow traveler on the winding road of healing and creativity. Each week, I'll share tools, practices, and conversations that will help you let go of what no longer serves you as you create stories that change lives, especially your own. Together, we'll explore how to trust your creative voice, support your mental health and resilience, work with your nervous system and unique design, and stay connected to your deepest calling as a writer, even when life gets messy. It's time, my friends, to write and live the story that sets you free. I'm honored to walk that journey alongside you, one story and one episode at a time. Well, hello, Jill. Welcome to Writing Your Resilience. I am so happy to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a joy to be here. And I know I already told you off recording how much I loved your questions, but the time that you spent with my work means so much to me. So thank you.
Well, I love to talk about books, and I love to talk about books that I love, and yours falls into that category. So I'm going to hold up the book itself. So if you're on YouTube, you can see it. This is The Heart Folds Early, though it is not your first book. And so before we dive into this in terms of the content and then how you wrote it, what would you like us to know about you as a person who has written this book and is also a serial memoirist?
Yeah. So I know that for young people, especially, this is hard to even fathom. But when I went to grad school at the University of Alabama in 1995, there were no nonfiction programs that I knew about, right? So my dream to become a journalist and travel the world with my photographer boyfriend, writing long form stories for National Geographic had fallen flat. And I had decided that my only way forward as a writer was to be a fiction writer because I did not know there were options, right? There were, in fact, two options at the time, the nonfiction Iowa program and one at Columbia. But again, this is the day when you wrote away for brochures that arrived to your house when you applied to grad school. So I went into a fiction program, and I was, of course, writing poorly disguised autobiographical fiction because I had, as so many of us have, a book inside me that I needed to tell before any other book could be written. I was holding a story that was like a boulder at the entrance to the cave, and I couldn't get out until I figured out how to push that out of the way. And so my first book was actually written under the cover of short stories. I had very encouraging faculty at the University of Alabama, and they knew what I was doing. And I wrote my first book, which is Dark Room, A Family Exposure, as my thesis. But I wasn't talking about it in my workshops. And again, I think this might be important to your listeners because whenever I tried to, which I did a couple of times, and I talk about this in Dark Room, people would say, well, that's therapy writing. That's not real writing. That's not what we do here. We're serious literary writers. And what you're trying to do is get therapy. So I took in that message at the time, right? Like I held it. And so I knew I had to do this work that I had to do, but I did it alone. Again, this comes to the serial memoir thing. I just had to be alone in a room. This was a completely solitary project. This is kind of the fun publishing part. I didn't care if it was ever published or not. I truly didn't. I needed to write it. And then I never published anything until I sent this book to the AWP Prize. It won the first time I sent it out. It was my first publication. That gave me false expectations about the way the publishing world works, let me tell you. So then after writing that, I thought that I was writing that book to get it out of the way so that I could then return to fiction, which I still believed was the real writing, right? Because I had just taken that message in. But it turns out that I had many memoirs in me. So this gets to the serial memoir question, that I think in terms of asking questions, and that's what we get to do in memoir. And so in a way, The Heart Folds Early is the next book. So this book just came out this year, 2026, but 3 books grew out of the same manuscript. My essay collection, If This Were Fiction, was me trying to figure out smaller versions of the story in essays. And my other book, which is only available in ebook, called Borrowed Babies, is about borrowed babies in home economics programs, which was about how do we learn to mother? What is that thing? And I just pulled that whole thing pretty much out and made it a separate book because there just wasn't room for it in this book. So I believe in using the whole animal when we write, right? So I think I became a serial memoirist by way of writing down a lot of things and then trying to figure out where each piece of that story was going to go.
What I love is that you're talking about the fact that you ask questions, right? And what I often tell writers is that a memoir, or really any piece of writing that we do, is the book or the project is the answer to a question, right? And so if you are a
Yeah.
curious person and you have a lot of questions, you can write a lot of books because you can look at the same experiences from different angles. Right. And that's one of the things that I think you do so well in The Heart Folds Early is that there's a specific question that you have around
Yeah.
how do we make a decision, or what is it like to truly make a decision and own it?
Yeah. And that's how I think Darkroom, the first book, and The Heart Folds Early, the most recent book, are really connected. Because if this had a question, it was in a world where lovers die suddenly on highways, where puppies are abandoned in paper bags, where little girls are assaulted in garages, right? In that world, knowing what I know and living in the body I live in, can I really have a baby? This book is actually about having a baby. Most people wouldn't know that reading it, I don't think. Maybe they would. And then this book is deep into that journey of motherhood, trying to figure out what it means to make a choice with my husband, who, by the way, this is a romantic part of the story, is a poet who I met reading Middlemarch in a class at the University of Alabama. And it's about our decision to terminate a pregnancy when we learned at a routine ultrasound, after we were told that everything was totally fine with the baby. We went truly to make a video and basically have a baby party. And that's when we learned that he had only half a heart. So this book is about our decision to end that pregnancy and everything that went into that choice. And then choices largely, as you mentioned. So
Yeah, and this was really written in response to the Dobbs decision. But if you read the whole book and you get
yeah.
to the acknowledgments, it took you decades to write
Yeah.
this. So, what was that process like?
Yeah. This would be maybe a moment I could read just a tiny bit. This is
Absolutely.
a book that does have a prologue. I had written a draft of the book years earlier, and it was before June of 2022 when Dobbs was overturned by the Supreme Court. And I had put the book out into the world with my then agent to the Big Five. And I heard very kind of strange and discouraging things back. Like, the marketing people don't know how to position a book with a baby dying, right? Nobody wants to hear about babies dying. We don't think we could sell this to the baby shower market. I was like, this was fully not my intention.
Oh my goodness.
Lisa, this was not what I thought should happen with this book. And so at that time, around 2018, I was like, you know what? I really got what I needed out of writing this book, and I'm good, right? I'm good. I've got other things to write. I've got living children to raise. I got a pandemic coming for us, right? Like, my life was full. And so I thought, I'm just going to put this one to bed permanently. And then it is not hyperbole to say that on that day, when I heard the news. I think we all remember. And I knew that I would return to this book and finish it. And I knew that I would boldly and clearly make it about choice in a way that I think I was tiptoeing around before because I was worried about upsetting people.
Yeah.
And I knew it was not only something I could do, but it was fully my responsibility to do it. I had the skills to do it. I had the story to tell. It was a collision of things that I couldn't look past, right? It just felt like it was my job. So I'll just read you a little bit about that moment, if it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are the moments you remember with terrifying clarity? On June 14th, 2022, I was in a second floor Airbnb in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, up before my family, coffee in hand, feet up on the couch, looking through a plate glass window over the construction site of a hot springs development, the Colorado River, the train tracks, and beyond all of that, a glorious mountain, looking as if she hadn't a single fuck left to give, rising up and making everything else, the bulldozers, the passenger train, the strip of condos, and even the mighty Colorado River, look small. Glowing red in the morning sun, she wore a shawl of green against the early morning chill, looking for all the world like the mother of us all. And then I picked up my phone and I saw the notification. I knew this was coming. We all knew this was coming. But as with those other great American disasters, JFK's assassination, the Challenger explosion, the second plane hitting the second tower, this was a jolt to the nerve center. And I will always remember where I was and what I was doing when I read the news. The Supreme Court had overturned Roe v. Wade. Our right to an abortion in the United States, our right to access medical care for our own bodies was no longer protected. We all knew this day was coming. I had seen this day coming. And yet, when it did, I felt the news so small, the size of a phone screen, like a kick to the stomach, like a cramp, my uterus contracting like a fist. The coffee in my mouth turned bitter. I flipped my phone face down on the couch as if I could hit pause, mute, reject call. Was the mountain trembling? Did I see her shake? If she had been a volcano, she would have blown. We both would have blown. So yeah, this book is about choice, about choices. So in that moment, I knew. And if people tell you, oh, that book wrote itself, I don't know. Either they're extremely lucky or they're lying. I really can't tell you. But I can say that from that kind of nexus, it felt like power. It felt like volcanic, situated in the center of my body. I knew that I would write the book and I wrote it from that place. And it was completely rewritten. I completely rewrote the book from that place. And it felt like it was unstoppable. I did it really quickly. And I'm not a fast writer, but that just gave me the clarity of vision. Mm-hmm. I knew fully, you were talking about questions, right? I knew exactly what the center of this book was and what story I needed to tell. And then I did.
And I'm so glad you did. And I love that you said that once you knew the center, and it was really the confluence of what was happening out in the world and the content you had already written and the experiences you'd had that led to this propulsive need, this volcanic need to write this book. And I've seen this happen with other writers, right? So I think sometimes, and I love how you said this too, is that you wrote the first draft or drafts, I'll say, because you know,
so many drafts.
So like many drafts, right?
Again, I don't want to
drafts.
make young writers nervous, but like so many drafts.
It's just how it goes. So you wrote that, but you allowed it to be for yourself. So you got everything you needed, and then you set it aside until the timing was right. Yeah. And part of that timing wasn't just the things happening out in the world, it was your reaction to it. And so that's an important part of the process, listeners, that I really want you to hear, is that sometimes there's this patient waiting that needs to be done so that everything can catch up to the story you have to tell.
Yeah. Yeah. And then another really interesting thing that happened in the final revision of this was, instead of sending everybody out of the room, which I did fully throughout the whole writing of Darkroom, say, at the point when I went to revisit this, I threw the doors open wide and I invited everyone in. right? And that's those moments where you're saying I'm breaking down the fourth wall. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you ever felt like I was talking directly to you, it's because I was, right? But I'm also talking to my mother, right? I'm also talking to my husband. I'm talking to my grown children who they have not read this book, but they might read this book, right? Long after I'm dead, say, right? I was kind of aware of that passing of time and when these words might meet up with different people. I was talking really carefully to parents who had met with similarly devastating diagnoses during pregnancy and made a different choice, right? I think that's one of the things that really held me back from writing this book or from putting this book out into the world, from finishing this book, was that idea that somehow my personal story would cast judgment that would be hurtful to someone who had already been so hurt, who was spending her nights checking oxygen saturations and
Yeah.
praying that we'd make it to morning, right? So it was really important to me that I considered everybody. And that was a different writing experience for me, right? It was crowded in that office. Who am I kidding? Mostly I write in bed. I
Bed is the best place to write.
think so. It feels very safe. So yeah, I think that that was also totally different. And it was something that felt really conscious to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I definitely felt like there were a lot of people on my shoulder as I was reading it. And I felt sometimes you were addressing me and sometimes you were addressing other people. And a moment that sticks out for me is this moment when you address your kids and you're
Mm.
like, warning, you may now be reading about your conception. Decide if you want to keep reading or skip this part. And
Yeah. That's what I'm saying about those future children. I was like, you know what? If this were my parents, this would ick me out. And I really wouldn't want to know. So I'm just going to give a small content warning here specifically for my children. The rest of you just keep going. It's sexy. It's a sexy bit. You might enjoy it. But yeah, kids, you might not.
And I'm sure when they come to read this, they will thank you for it because then they can make the choice that's right for them.
I hope so. I think we'll get to this question later. But if we think about the big things that I write about, I think at the center of everything, I'm always just trying to write my way back towards love, right?
Mm-hmm.
And make a space where we can give love and receive love. And maybe that's deep in my hippie upbringing, right? But it's in me and it's what I hope for my children, for you, for our world. So,
Yeah, as I was thinking about the choice that you had to make and the way that you allow us to love baby brother by making him real,
yeah.
right? For us. This is a real character on the page that we get to love. And so we get to feel that devastating loss alongside you. And you do that with all of your characters. And what was really interesting is how you put different stories in your life together to create this. So, one person who I felt on my shoulder a lot was Colin, who was your
Yeah.
first fiance who died very tragically. And I teach writing. I'm a writer myself. I'm always thinking about why are people putting these two things together in these ways? I have my guesses. I mean, based on a person who also lost someone when I was around the same age, I lost my brother. And so I could connect with that sense of just devastating grief that
Yeah.
you experienced at that age. Because what a lot of people don't realize about losing someone when you are that young is that you don't yet have the experiences to know that there is an other side. For me, I will say, I don't want to speak for your own experience, but when my brother died, I was 22. I couldn't see another side where I could live with this pain and still have this vibrant life. That was inconceivable to me.
Yeah.
Whereas if I lost someone now, of course I would be devastated and I would probably feel a similar range of emotions. But I also know I survived my brother's death.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious because Colin comes up so much in the book. What were you thinking about in terms of choices that can be made versus choices that are taken away, and how you wanted us to engage in that conversation?
You and I have a lot in common, Lisa, in that we ask very intricate questions. So I try to take
I know. I was like,
sometimes.
here's part one, part two. Oh, and then there's part nine that I didn't even tell you was going to happen. Yeah, I know I do that.
Sometimes my students laugh at me and I'll just see their faces, their eyes are getting wider and wider. And I'm still asking the question on part 27. I'll just stop and say, like, I'm so sorry. That was a really Crispin question, wasn't it? So I see that I'm not alone. So I've made some notes. I might miss part of this, but from the very beginning, I would like to say that on a really personal note, it touches my heart in a really meaningful way when a reader like you says baby brother's name out loud, right? And I'll cry saying it, but I think that's an important part of this process, right? Is that we made a choice to end the pregnancy and end his life, right? And he had a name in utero, right? All of our whole family loved him. We grieve him, and still that doesn't mean that we regret the choice, right?
Yeah.
That was part of what I was navigating. And so as a mom, when I hear you say his name, right, that makes me happy that I made a place for him in the world and then I'm able to share him. And you can see it. I mean, I still miss him. I'll always miss him. We just on May 19th, this May 19th, that was the 20 years since his death. So we just marked that passage in our family, which in other interesting ways, his death also made it possible for his little brother, who is now 18, to be born, right?
Yeah.
And so life has a way of moving on. And like you're talking about after your brother died so young and so early, right? And to be in your early 20s and have that kind of loss happen as with your brother and Colin, that's what this book was about, was trying to write myself out of that darkness. I just could not see the other side. I didn't, the way you said it was perfect. I just had no concept that there could be another side on the side of all that darkness. It just didn't seem possible. And now I have an essay called Spinning, which is in this book. It's kind of a ghost story when Colin shows up in my cycling class. And I'm faced with the question, like, what if Colin were to come back now? I've got Mark, I've got the kids, right? Like, what would that be? When there was a time when all I prayed for every second of every day was that he would come back. Again, magical thinking, I get that. But I'm just saying, these are interesting questions to consider. Okay, so the naming baby brother thing, losing someone young. Grief doesn't get easier with practice. This is the thing I think about a lot. And we still take with us everyone we've grieved, and that brings us to the next grief, right? So I think that's a really vital thing. Something I discovered in the writing of this book. So I'm just going to read a snippet. It's from the very beginning of chapter 1, because you were talking about kind of putting Colin and baby brother next to each other.
Yeah.
And as writers who write these big things of our lives over and over again, right? Sometimes we think, well, nobody needs to hear about Colin anymore. That was a long time ago. And they do, because of course, losing someone at that age rewired me on a cellular level.
Yeah.
Right. And as my children could tell you, my parenting, my loving, everything about me was changed by that experience. So I can't talk about any of those things without talking about Colin. I've tried. And what comes out is not the truth. And my goal is always to say the truest thing. So I try to tell shorter versions of it sometimes, but I kind of address that here. Before we lost the baby, correction. Before we chose to end my pregnancy and let our broken-hearted baby die, Colin's accident was the grief story at the center of my life on this planet, almost burning me to ashes as he had been burned. Like all stories of grief, this one began with love. 1 year after we met, Colin dropped to his knee in the sand and asked me to marry him. I can still see his face looking up at me, earnest and in love, but also mischievous, sparkling, confident. Pretty sure he had this locked in. There were drops of water in his dark hair, catching the last of the day's soft light, mist. On the Oregon coast, there is always mist. I said yes, and then less than a month after Colin's proposal, the phone rang in the house we shared with his sister. Again, a lifetime later, if I listen, I can hear the phone, the scream, the sound coming out of the dark with the news that Colin was dead. I know this is how accidents happen, suddenly, randomly, crushingly. In the slow months after Colin's death, my heart took in this knowledge like a sea change. I could love a breathing someone, and then, like that, he could be gone. I talk about that kind of cellular restructuring. I think this is the magic of memoir. One of them. There's so much magic to memoir. You all need to try it if you haven't. Which is that I don't want to be a spoiler, so I'm just going to read the last line. So I end Darkroom at Colin's gravesite, which was at the ranch where he grew up as a kid. We basically made a pile of his ashes, and then the family left me there. So I was the last one with him on that mountain. I wished for the rain to come hard. I held those ashes in my hand and decided he hadn't been cooked long enough, that perhaps it takes longer to burn the body of such a young man. He wasn't done. Colin's pile was gritty with chunks of bone, like coarse sand, not dust, not ashes to ashes. I kissed the grains of him that I held in my palm, kissed him and licked his granules from my lips, crunched him with my teeth. I am taking you into me, I told him. I caught up his dryness with my tongue, knowing he would cling to me. And that was the end of this book, right? And then when I was writing about baby brother, I learned about the way that fetal cells cross the placenta and become part of our body, right? Microchimerism. And how literally we carry in our cells every baby we've ever carried, whether or not they're born. Kind of this idea of how we carry with us those we love and lose felt not sad to me, but just like a gift. As I wrote the Heartfolds earlier, I was going along and gathering up kind of the power of my knowing that I carry them with me. That felt magical. It just felt magical. I don't know if that answered your question, Lisa. I think it sort of did. That's why they had to be told together, because as I went through, not only had losing Colin rewired me, but Colin was with me when I was losing baby brother. If I prayed, it was to him and my grandmother and my Uncle Mark and those I've lost who I carry with me. And I remember specifically saying to Colin, he's coming. Watch for him, watch over him. Don't let him be hungry. Keep him warm. And knowing that that was okay. So that gets pretty spiritual, but that was my sense of it, was that I was carrying my people with me and my people were carrying my people.
Yeah. So first I'm just going to take a deep breath because like it's making me teary. I do think that's the power of it. He is a part of the story. I mean, he's part of your story, and sharing his death at the beginning sets the stage for both how you grieve and how you live, which is essential to understanding what happens with baby brother and how you're going to wrestle with it and what you're going to lean on in order to be able to make this really difficult choice that is ultimately made from a space of compassion. I've told people before, sometimes the most powerful love we have is the love to be able to let go, right? To understand when it's time to say goodbye. And that is really difficult for most of us. But how beautiful that you had Colin on the other side, that you could hand baby brother to.
Thank you for saying that so beautifully. Having read the book, you know this. I break down this decision really, really carefully in the book. And I can't know, this is what I come to, this conclusion that imagined choices are not choices, right? That we only are really making a choice when we are in the moment making the choice. And then we, in fact, make the choice. And not making a choice is also a choice, right? So like doing nothing is also a choice. But if we just imagine that, it's speculative and not really a choice. And so, but I would run those scenarios in my mind, right? Because as you say, the center of our decision, and again, I say our, and Mark and I knew that the decision ultimately was mine because it was my body and I was carrying our baby in my body. And this was our family together and our baby together, right? And so, well, sometimes I thought, oh, does that make me a bad feminist that I'm somehow saying that Mark was part of this decision with me? And then I think, well, Mark was fully part of this decision with me. That's the truth, right? So I'm trying to tell the deepest truth, even as I sometimes hear, would this be an argument against this, or would this be an argument? So when we made this choice, well, it came down to many things, but There's a moment, and I tell this story in the book, where Mark asks the pediatric cardiologist, who has been like sketching on a piece of paper these percentages
Mm-hmm.
for his survival at each surgery. And they're low. His chances were very bad. The doctor said that his condition was incompatible with life.
Mm-hmm.
However, there was a possibility that he could have all of these surgeries. And then Mark said, and so he has all these surgeries, and if he survives with this 30% survival, and then he still
Mm-hmm.
has half a heart, right? And the surgeon said, yes, he still has half a heart. At the time, the oldest survivor of the condition, which is called hypoplastic left heart, but it also has a lot of variations, like our baby didn't have an aorta, there were whole parts missing. At that time, no child had survived beyond their teen years. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, in the interim, there was much suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And we could not choose that life for him. We had a preschooler at the time,
Mm-hmm.
Ella, who gets to be in the book a lot. She just graduated from college. She is still the wise and kind and empathic little person. And I thought if it weren't for her, because it would have been selfish. And I often thought I would have done this to carry him as long as I could have and gone through the birthing process so that I could hold him one time right
Yeah.
before he died. But I'll never know, because that felt like a cruel thing to do to Ella. It was complicated in so many ways. And the decision had to happen so quickly,
Yeah.
because we were coming up against the end of the window where we could choose to have that. Only about 2% of abortions happen in that 18 to 20 week window. So I do hope that this book will show people a real family and a real mom making a real decision from the middle of a life, right? That
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of other pieces to it. And I hope that people will look upon that choice with compassion and maybe take that compassion into their own hearts for whatever they need it for.
Yeah, I second that. And I certainly say that I felt that. The relentlessness of having to make a decision so quick. I mean, it required travel, it required so many things from you to be able to do that. And knowing that two very likely outcomes were that you go through the whole birth process, which for you was fraught
Yeah.
because you almost died when Ella was born.
Yes.
And then you could go through that and risk your life to possibly hold a baby that's stillborn or a baby who dies
Yes.
right away. Or if you had made the decision to have all of the surgeries, would be whisked away almost immediately to try to save his life. And then you may never see him again. There were so many scenarios that you share with us where the outcome was so poor. I mean, it helped me understand. And yet you also allow us to see what the opposite is, right? Because some people make a different choice and you don't judge that choice,
No.
right? I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is to not judge other people's choices, but also to give yourself tremendous grace with the choices that you have to make in your own life or what I have to make in my life, because there are so many factors that go into it. And we're always trying to do the best we can with the time we have and with all of the constraints and pressures that we have on us.
Yeah. And with love for our children, fully made out of love for our children.
Yeah, 100%. I'm loving how deep our conversation has already gone. And so, how much we've talked about, like, my heart is both aching and full at the same time because I'm connecting with you. And you don't even know all of the things that we have in common because there's a lot that goes beyond this in our propensity to ask 5-part and 10-part questions.
Yes. Maybe there's some connection there between the life experience and they're like, but wait, and then there's this, and then also
Mm-hmm.
this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, life is a prison and we look at it from all sides. At least that's how
Yeah.
I look at it. And I love being able to do that. And so, yeah, whenever I'm thinking about stuff that's like, oh, the prism,
Yeah.
shiny.
Yeah. I have a writing exercise with my students that I call opposite world, which is, I think sometimes, especially when we're writing really difficult material, we can get mired in the darkness of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I'm just choosing like a lighter. The whole summer at sleepaway camp was awful. The mosquitoes, the mud, the swim shoes, whatever, right? The filthy showers. But I was like, was there one day where
Mm-hmm.
something incredible happened? Was there one day where you were the one who got to swing from the rope swing and, right, after years of failing the presidential fitness test, which by the way is coming back and I'm against after
I
years of,
hated that test.
oh my gosh, it practically, yeah, could have a whole nother podcast on that. That could be
Mm-hmm.
an anthology. The shame that the presidential fitness test brought to so many of us.
Oh,
Anyway,
yes.
so that moment of glory where people saw you for who you really were at camp, right? Whatever that thing that is the opposite. And I think that it can help us sort of crack open a window and see everything else more clearly. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that exercise. And listeners, I want you to rewind and write it down so that you can try that, regardless of whether or not you're writing a book, right?
Yeah.
Because just even from a neuroscientific perspective, when we are thinking about difficult and dark things, it begets more difficult and dark memories. And so it's very easy for us to go down these deep, dark rabbit holes of pain because that's how the brain works. And so this is a very conscious exercise that helps you disrupt that pattern. What I would say, if you are writing something really dark, listeners, and you're in that rabbit hole, one, it's okay. We all love you. Love yourself through that process. Take breaks as you need to. But also, when you look at the opposite world, it may not be something that's superb and glorious. And I think that's important because I've had so many writers come to me, and I'm sure you've had this too, where they've written something and we've been deep, deep, deep in the pain for a really long time. And you're asking, where's the lightness? Where's the levity? We've got to have a rest, right? A breath note of some kind. And I've seen writers who feel really frustrated because they suddenly feel like they have to create like the birthday party that went so well moment of life. And they don't. It just has to be something that gives us a little breath, a little breathing room so that we can rest and sit with the rest of the darkness.
Yeah. And the truth is, I think that when we are able to let in that light and air in some way, be it with a moment of humor, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
because we're going through something tough doesn't mean we leave our personalities at the door, right? So
Right.
I'm a laugher. I love to laugh, right? And I have learned in this life that when the opportunity arises to laugh, why would I stop that? I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
stop that. The other stuff will be waiting for me. I know,
Oh, yeah.
right? It'll be there. So if you can laugh, laugh. That's just life advice. But when we have those moments that just give the reader a chance to come up a little, right, with us, it has to be real, right? So that's why the
Yes.
birthday party thing doesn't, right? It has to be real. Partially, I think we edit these moments out because we think, oh, this moment is too serious for this thing. Let yourself have that fullness of being, even when you're writing tough material. And then when we do that, the truth is that you can actually take a reader and yourself to harder places,
Mm-hmm.
deeper into the place where you do need to find a way maybe to turn on a light, right? That place you've been trying to get to because of that air and that light, right? So you're not sacrificing that depth, you're opening the door to it. And I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
really important thing to remember. Or the window, whatever metaphor you want, open it up, let in some light and air.
Yeah, I was working with one of my writing critique partners recently, and one of the things she said is like, if you can make people laugh, you've got them. So if you can find those moments of absurdity in
Yes.
your own story, I think sometimes that's where the lightness comes from rather than trying to make it up. And I know we're on the same page on that, but
Yeah.
allow yourself to laugh, allow the reader to laugh, and allow yourself to find that absurdity. And one of the things I tell people, I'm curious to know if you interpret this the same way or not, is when people are writing about traumatic material, I often tell them before you write the hardest stuff, it doesn't have to be everything, but you want to go in with a flashlight so that you know what you're shining the light on and you also know what you're bringing with you that are your strategies. And you shared something similar in your intake, and it says, when you're in a dark room and feel the need to touch everything before you leave, turn on a light.
Yeah. That has been like a guiding principle in my living and writing life. They're
Mm-hmm.
very closely intertwined, by the way. um, since I was grieving Colin early on. And the basics of that story, and I think some fragment of the story really probably appears in every book I've written because it's so fundamental. But the core narrative is that I was seeing all these therapists after Colin died. Oh, P.S. This is also dark. Early on, someone said it's such a litany of horrors. And I was like, I know, right? So I had been sexually abused as a child. And then I had developed a very serious eating disorder. I was bulimorexic. When Colin came into my life, I was pretty much set on self-destructing until I was dead. Right. So that's kind of an important part of this, because when Colin came into my life and loved me the way he loved me for the whole person that I was, it saved my life. And then he left.
Yeah.
Again, who knows what would have happened if he'd stayed? Could we have sustained that kind of relationship wherein he was the saver and I was the saved? I don't know. I'll never know. So I'm in therapy. So this is an important part. After he dies, as we well know, therapy can be very useful. I haven't even gotten back to the question of how I feel about people calling writing therapy writing, but we might get to that. And it can also be not useful, right?
Yeah.
There are good teachers, there are bad teachers. There are good project managers, there are bad project managers. There are good therapists. So I went through quite a run of therapists and I was feeling somewhat desperate. And my mom hooked me up with a woman who channeled an angel. Stick with me here, people, by the name of Divine Grace. And so Divine Grace was hanging out with me. And what I was looking for was like Colin to talk to me. Right. But Divine Grace wasn't going for that. Divine Grace had other things she wanted to talk to me about. And I was also at the time trying to heal from the sexual abuse. And again, very complicated. You'd have to read the first book to understand it. But I mean, it was definitely repressed memory, but also I had just set it aside and chose not to think about it for a long time. Right. So when I went back thinking, okay, if I'm going to heal, I'm going to need to see everything that happened to me. I was abused by an older teenager, 7 years older than I was, for many, many years when I was a small child. And a lot of things happened. Right. And so I'd think of a terrible thing. I'd write that one down and I'd think I'd have to get to the next terrible thing and the next terrible thing. And kind of like the way you were saying about the feeling after your brother died, where it just seemed like there was nothing but darkness, nothing on the other side. And so Divine Grace said, okay, you're in a dark room. And I thought to myself, yeah, I am. You need to touch everything in the room before you leave the room. How will you know when you're done? Which was exactly my circumstance. That was exactly how I was feeling in my life. I'd never thought of it that so clearly. And I thought, I won't. There's no way. That's impossible. That's an impossible task. And then she said simply, why don't you turn on a light? And I thought, whoa, Divine Grace. Like that is some solid advice right there. Right. And from that moment on, I found ways to turn on a light. And I realized that healing from something does not involve a scrupulous cataloging of everything that was done to us, right? I think we need to know enough to be able to move forward and step out into the light. From that day forward, I never made it my task to make sure I could remember every terrible thing. There was no reason to, right? This is another side note about Colin being with me. I didn't realize how woo-woo I am. I guess I'm pretty woo-woo, but I don't know how long it was weeks after Colin died. And he'd been helping me heal from my bulimia. And he was really working hard with me on it. And I was making good progress. And then after he died, I thought, well, at least I can go back to being bulimic again, because that'll be a relief. And I was in the bathtub when I had this thought. I remember it really specifically. And I heard him say, I don't even have a body anymore. And I was like, what? And I never made myself throw up again, because I thought, here I am. I have the privilege of having this body. Colin doesn't even have a body anymore. And I can not do that to this one. I never did again. So do I recommend this as a cure for serious eating disorders? No, I do not. Do I recognize it as a cure to my own eating disorder? Absolutely.
And I think that you just shared a beautiful way that you did let the light in your own life. And by the way, I am super witchy and super woo-woo. I channel the Akashic Records, so and
Okay.
listeners know this. So
Okay.
I'm right there with you.
I don't want to be alarming you or anything.
Oh, Lord,
I'm
no.
also like, I'm solid in a lot of ways. And I've just seen a lot. I've seen some things go down. So I'm
Hmm.
just like,
Right. You've lived life and you understand there's a lot there.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a way that even in the darkest of your experiences, you allowed the light in. Thinking about that moment in the bathtub, you heard Colin's voice and you recognized something and it changed you, right? And sometimes we have these spontaneous, I'm going to call them healings. Maybe that's not the right
Yeah.
word, but these
Yeah.
spontaneous moments of change that
Yeah.
happen in our lives. And that's one way that we allow the light in, we allow ourselves to be changed, right? And
Yes.
then there are the things that we do on the page that help us turn the light on. And that's a conscious process. So it's always
Yes.
that dance between how will you allow yourself to be changed by the process, and then how will that change show up on the page. And then how do you let readers know that a person who has no idea how things are going to turn out and who is bumbling through the world is not the person who's writing this book? And how do you do that in a way that doesn't feel hokey or contrived, or like, this is what I'll say, breaker one, this
Yeah.
is me, the author. There's a little bit of wisdom I need to drop right now. Get ready to listen.
That's good. Yeah. Well, I think I might do a little of the breaker one thing sometimes, if I'm being fully honest with myself, hopefully with more subtlety, but maybe not always. I think that this kind of ties in a lot of things we've been talking about, but I want to just say this out loud for your listeners who are trying to write hard stories. I think as a teacher, there are two fundamental questions I hear. Students don't always know right away, they're asking them, but this is what it boils down to. Can I say this? Like, am I
Hmm.
allowed to say this thing? Right? Because there's a lot of fear. And so my answer to that is always yes. Yeah, you can. You can do it. I have never, ever, ever met a secret that helped anybody. And that's the foundation
Yeah.
of my life, right? Except for maybe a perpetrator or somebody who's trying to hurt someone or somebody who's trying to control a narrative so that they
Hmm.
might hurt someone or control someone, right? But for us in our lives, carrying secrets is not going to help us no matter what anybody else has told you. It just isn't.
Yeah.
That's a truth that I know. And so I operate from that place and I try to teach that to my students. And then the next question, of course, is what you're getting at here, which is, so how do I do that? Like,
Yeah.
so thanks, lady. That's super helpful. And writing this first book, Dark Room, was a big step on that for me because I had all these dark areas in my own brain that I couldn't even walk through. And once I let the light in, it wasn't lurking there to scare or control me anymore.
Hmm.
And so I could move forward into the rest of my kind of like writing, living, loving life. Then how do you do it? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with managing time, handling time in memoir and essays. I edit the magazine Riverteeth. And so that's like kind of mid length. We take any length nonfiction, but they're usually somewhere between 1,500 and all the way up to like, say, 12,000 words
Hmm.
sometimes. Rarely. It has to be really, really good.
Yeah.
Listen to me out there. So, but we also have a journal of flash micro nonfiction that publishes every Monday for free. Y'all should go sign up. It's called Beautiful Things. So at riverteethjournal.com, you can sign up. So in my work as an editor, handling time is an issue at every level. Micro essays, standard length essays, all the way up through long form, all the way to book length. And by the time you get to book length, of course, you've got a real bear on your hands, right? So, like, because it is hard to handle time. It's really hard. It's one of the most
Yes.
difficult things we do. And by handling time, you can't ignore it. You have to face the complications of it because you're going to find new truth there. So that's one
Hmm.
thing. And so for me, and this may feel too simplistic to folks, but I really have to find a place to stand. I have to know where I am because, of course, my life is rich and complicated and has spanned now many years. And you don't know what's going on in my brain. So if I'm going to take you with me as a reader, I need to find a way to do that. In order to reduce that complication, I have to root myself in time. So when I say that I rewrote this book from that year after Roe was overturned, that's where I was standing to tell the story. So if I was going to go back in time, it's the past. If I was going to go forward in time, I'm thinking forward, and the now was kind of around that time. Because if I don't know, and this is often the case with writers who are wrestling with time, they're like, well, maybe I was there, maybe I was there. I was like, figure out where you want to be, stand there, identify your question that you're trying to ask, because time and the urgent question that you're asking are linked together.
Mm-hmm.
And then let everything move from that point, almost like a dancer who's like pivoting from that point. That's how I do it. Easy peasy, huh?
Yeah. Super easy.
I tell my students, I was like, what we want to do here is condense this down into really clear language so we say something beautiful and offer new meaning about the human condition. Easy
Mm-hmm.
peasy.
Yeah. Just snap your fingers is going to happen.
Yeah. It takes a
Oh,
lot
go
of
ahead.
revision.
Yeah, it does. And I think allowing yourself to embrace that revision is writing and that it is okay if it takes a while. And for me personally, I think that those flash forwards or authorial asides work best when they're short. And I
Yes.
think that's part of the magic is that on the page, it's just a sentence or maybe two sentences, and then we're back where we were in the scene, as an example. But where it fails is when it's really long, right? And then
Yeah.
we forget where we are in time and you've told us too much.
Yeah.
So, what you need to do is do some of that writing off the book or on another page and write as much as you absolutely need
Yeah.
to until you find the one true thing that you need to say that belongs in your book. And so, when you find that sentence, that powerful sentence, and you'll
Yes.
know it in your body, right? You'll have
Yes.
some sort of body awareness of that's the thing, then add that.
Yes. What you're saying here is something that took me a long time to understand, but that memoir writing is not an act of accumulation, it's an act of extraction and
Yes.
subtraction, right? It's the kind of finding, tunneling your way through all that memory and everything else that's going to come in and finding that one little, we could call it a diamond. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's a piece of coal, right?
Yeah.
But yeah. Another thing, I mentioned this earlier, since we're getting deep into this question, I opened the page at random when I saw this. So much of this has to do with something really simple that I call signposting. It's just those moments, especially in a memoir, like a book length piece, where we have to move the reader with us because they don't have access to everything we have in our brains. And so I'm always like, more clarity, more clarity, more clarity. And I
Mhm.
think what writers sometimes resist is they're like, well, if I say that so clearly, that's so obvious. Like,
Yeah.
well, it's not obvious to the person who has no idea where you were born, where you grew up, where this was going, how long this, blah, blah, blah. Right. So just keeping those kind of where and whens clear.
Mhm.
And the signposting is, I can just give you some examples. I'm in chapter 8, not quite the middle of the book. It's called Becoming the Mother I Am. And I'm just looking at the beginning of sections. So one section begins, but back then, 5 months pregnant with our first baby, I'm ashamed to say that despite a minor in women's studies from a flagship institution, I was still woefully ignorant of much of the history of abortion. Right. So you know that I'm in the now, and I've done a lot of research on the history of abortion, right? No longer woefully ignorant, but I'm looking back on this time when I was pregnant for the first time. So I've brought you with me to that place.
Mhm.
You know that we've traveled from the now of this super obsessed with every detail about the history of abortion, right?
Yeah.
Back to that time. Or, for example, the next one is when I was a child between the ages of 4 and 13. We lived for 9 years on a long strip of sand separated from the Massachusetts mainland by the Merrimack River. So, again, I've moved you with me. And if I'm doing it well, the signposting, you won't even notice it. Not really,
Yes.
right? It'll be like punctuation. And yet you won't have to be like, wait, where the heck are we? Where did she go? Why are we in Massachusetts and she's 6? Right. Sometimes I'll have a student in my office, they'll explain to me where they are. And I was like, what you just said, just write that down.
Mhm.
That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
Right? There's no like secret sauce here. You just say the thing.
Mhm.
Right. Or if I want to get fancy, I mean, I often get fancy.
This is a pretty intricate book. I just have to say,
Yeah.
like, when I was reading it, I was right there with you. Everything felt seamless. But I think because I've done a lot of editing, I'm always reading with two lenses at the exact same
Yeah.
time. So I'm with you fully. I doesn't feel like there's any interruptions. And at the same time, I'm like, whoa, she's doing this really intricate stuff with time. And whoa, wait, there's the writer coming in. But it feels really important for us to know this, but also it feels seamless. So yeah, my hats are off
Thank
to you.
you.
And what I'm going
That
to say is, listeners, if you want to understand how to do this, buy The Heart Folds Early. Look, actually buy 2 copies. Buy one so you have this nice copy for your bookshelf, and then buy what I call the practice copy, where you get out your highlighter and you analyze things and look at how Jill did this.
Yeah, well, thank you. That means a lot to me. And the truth is, I love that part of writing, the part where you like encounter a technical problem. Like, how am I
Mm-hmm.
going to do this? And then it's the puzzle of figuring out how to make it happen,
Yeah.
right? So that it can become textured and rich and real and
Mm-hmm.
not lose anybody. I love sections. I love working in pieces. I think this is a really helpful thing for people. And I think oftentimes I'll write like a full out narrative of something that happened. And then I'll realize that I want to break that into 3 pieces and I want to write, I don't know, I'm just making this up now, 3 pieces on the history of rock climbing or something, like a
Mm-hmm.
history of rock climbing. And then I'm going to splice those things together. And
Yes.
then, like, a third thing that comes in might be the metaphor. Now I'm thinking of a long essay I wrote called Falling, which you can read online
Mm-hmm.
for free. It won the Iron Horse Long Story Prize, and they made this like beautiful e-single. So you can just look up Falling by Jill Christman. And it is a good example of this because it has a core narrative, but it also has going back in time to explore something. And then it has this research piece, which is about people like Alex Honnold who do free solo climbing, which is
Mm-hmm.
beyond my concept of what a person should do with their body. Right.
Yeah.
So that's another way that I let in light, I think, is by letting my obsessions come in. So, like, when I
Mm-hmm.
heard that now he just recently did this other climb, I was like, who does that? Right. And so then I do all this research and I'm like, this is an interesting way for me to think about my deep fear for my children. You wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily put them together, but sometimes when you put these unexpected things together, it can help you find something new in those questions you're asking. So I do a lot of color coding, I do a lot of weaving. It feels like we can move things around easily in like Microsoft Word, right? And we can, but we always see it in the box. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
always in that frame. And so if you can print it out and cut it up and crawl among the stacks, that can really help you find new and exciting patterns and connections. So don't try just one thing. Try all the different things.
Yeah, it is so fun. And I'm a huge fan of using closet doors because we usually don't hang anything on them. There's like so much you can do. I 100% agree that part of this process needs to be tactile. And so anything you can do that gets it out of the computer
Yes.
and in your hands, it's so much more manipulatable.
Yeah.
And you're going to have insights that you cannot have when you're looking at the screen. Well, Jill, I could talk with you about this forever because I can just tell you are of my tribe. And there's so many things we could talk about in relation to your writing career, your book, all of this. And we have to wrap up. If you could leave listeners with one thing, what would that be?
I know that you think a lot about resilience, obviously, on this
Mm-hmm.
podcast. And I would say that I believe very deeply in identifying our gifts as human beings and then using them for good in the world.
Yeah.
And one of my gifts I recognize is that I can go to hard places in my life and writing and say something true. And I am committed to making that space available to other writers and
Mm-hmm.
humans. I believe that you have to look hard, go deep, and allow yourself to move beyond what you thought you already knew. That both healing and writing, when we do it as I hope we can do it, are a process of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not so much about courage as it is about finding the path that is going to help you carry the story you've been bearing alone. So that is
Yes.
one thing I would say. And speaking of solitude, the other thing I would say is to let yourself pretend that you're writing only for yourself. No one else has to see it. I once heard Cheryl Strayed say in her wonderful, speaking of humor in dark places, wonderful way, that there is not a direct line from your laptop to the New Yorker. So you're safe, right? So say what you need to say. Now, I broke that rule when I wrote this book and I invited everyone into the room. And so know that also. Sometimes there's something that works for you for a while and then it doesn't work anymore. That's okay. Set it aside and do a different thing. That was 2. This might be the most important piece of editing advice that I give. When you're writing something difficult, you're going to feel that moment where you come up against the hard thing. You're going to feel it in your body. You're going to want to leave. This is the moment where suddenly you've opened another tab and you think that you must check your email and see if parking lot R2 is going to be closed on Memorial Day, right? Nobody cares. But you know from that flight response that you got that you've gotten up against something. Recognize this, be gentle with yourself, and stay, right? Let yourself linger in that uncertainty. That's a phrase that I use a lot. Linger in the uncertainty, slow down when it gets hard, breathe into the space where you feel the pain, just as you would in yoga. This works in writing also. Those would be my top 3 tips.
I love those tips. And I love how you help us be courageous and also gentle with ourselves, because it is so important to say what you want to say and also recognize that in the process of saying it, you may run into resistance.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But that resistance is a point of curiosity. And when you can push past it, that's where insights and realization happens. And that's where the big magic comes from when we are writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Jill, this has been so fun. And
Thanks.
I just want to thank you for writing your book and also for coming on the show. It's been just a delight to have you on today.
Thank you, Lisa. It's been so much fun.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Jill and most importantly, buy a copy of The Heart Folds Early and her other books, please see the show notes for this episode. And if you'd like to take this content a little deeper, grab your journal and begin by writing about a tough topic. It doesn't have to be the toughest one, but pick something where the experience is hard and it feels like you're roaming around in the dark. Write for about 20 minutes, then take a break. And when you come back, I want you to make a list of the moments within this event where it felt like you were in the opposite world. Pick the one that speaks to you and write about it. Afterwards, notice what you learn about your story and your writing process. You can make my day by sharing your insights in the comments. And speaking of your thoughts on the show, I'd like to give a quick shout out and thank you to Mark Kennedy and Marisa Russello, who both asked if I could do an episode on reflection and adding insight from the author to your work. Thank you so much for this question. I crafted this episode with you in mind, and I hope you got everything you needed from it. And listeners, if you haven't reached out to the show, I would love to hear from you too. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I couldn't do this podcast without your support. If you love this episode, here are 3 simple ways that you can keep this show thriving. 1, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. 2, leave a 5-star review so others can find the show. 3, join my engaged dynamic community by signing up for the Writing and Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Ditch Your Inner Critic, 5 tools to transform self-doubt into self-support. Until next time, remember that your story matters. As you write and connect with the truest, most authentic version, you become not just the writer, but the person you're meant to be. And that, my friends, is the real freedom writing can offer.